Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about ketogenic diets and the extremely morbidly obese. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Alright, normally when I get Patreon questions, I answer them on Patreon. However, I thought this question was good enough that it's worth discussing with my much larger audience here, not just my audience that pay to be on the Patreon, but for everybody. And I think it's important to understand that there are exceptions to most rules out there. There are exceptions to most rules. When I say that ketogenic diets are unhealthy, they're bad, I don't recommend them, I really do mean that based upon the long-term data. But, I mean, let's talk about the exception to the rule. I had this person who asked the question. They said, hey, I'm down to 330 pounds right now. I've managed to lose 20 pounds. But I've noticed I struggle even with pasta, rice, things like that, of overeating them. So it seems like the ketogenic diet seemed to suppress my appetite. Is it okay to run? That's what he wants to know. Well, here's the thing that we need to get to. Your concerns for ketogenic diets, and I'll jump into that further, and anyone, the keto-tards are going to come argue with me, and that's fine, but you guys are clearly not up to speed on the evidence. See, I've read every book written by every ketogenic author ever. At least, I stopped reading about 5 or 6 years ago. I've probably read 15 books by everyone from Dr. Atkins to every other MD who recommends these diets. I'm not ignorant on the topic. However, ketogenic followers do tend to be ignorant of the other side of the argument, and that's the problem we run into. They're not actually open-minded. They bought into a fringe and put fingers in their ears, and they don't want to hear anything else because they bought into it. Your concerns with the health effects of ketogenic diets are not short-term. They are long-term. In other words, when you say, I'm going to live a ketogenic lifestyle, that's what's going to kill you. A ketogenic diet is not going to, unless there is some major problem with your electrolytes, and this is why you are told to be under the care of a medical doctor. It's very rare for this sort of diet to kill you in the short term. It has happened, and it does happen. There are people who drop dead from this diet. They're relatively rare. But we're usually concerned with mostly the long-term health problems associated with it. And again, that comes by combining that with being overweight. When you are 330 pounds, you need an emergency intervention. Literally anything that you can do to get the next 20 or 30 pounds of body fat off of you is probably going to help you live longer than just about any risk factor from your diet. That's the point. The ketogenic diet, if it's the only thing that's working for you at that point because of your insulin sensitivity, due to your hunger, everything else, that's a problem. Now, ketogenic diets reduce insulin sensitivity. They mask insulin insensitivity in the short term, so that's why a lot of people think that their insulin sensitivity is improving on it. It doesn't actually do that. It actually makes it worse. But if you can mask the negative effects in the short term, it can help you get your appetite under control. Ketones are appetite suppressing. Eating only 5 or 6 foods, and that's all you eat every day ever, tends to be appetite suppressing. It's a lack of versatility in the diet combined with ketosis and mimicking a better insulin sensitivity in the short term, again, helps keep your appetite back under control. Calorie per calorie, it's an inferior diet. Muscle preservation, it's an inferior diet. Long-term health, it's an inferior diet. That is not subject to debate. The data is pretty strong on all of that. However, for a person in that situation, and it suppresses their appetite and allows them to get their calories down to 3,000 or whatever they need to eat to lose weight. Because if you're 330, I promise you can lose weight on 3,000 calories. If you are even halfway active, like you get up and take a walk every day, if you can get down to 3,000 calories, you're going to melt body fat off yourself like a hot knife through butter. People who are that big don't eat through only 3,000 calories. You don't get to 330, 350 pounds on 3,000 calories. Doesn't happen. Those are people who are eating 5,000, 6,000 calories every day for the past 5 years straight. It's just the only way to get there. So the situation there, it's the lesser of two evils. That person needs an emergency intervention. And if that specific diet helps them do it, then by all means carry on. Now, people say, but aren't there health concerns? Of course there are. But what you find with most of these diets, as long as you're not nutrient deficient, most of the health markers that we are concerned about from eating excessive amounts of things that we're worried about in our diet, whether it's refined sugars, fructose, saturated fat, any of these things that we are concerned about, those things don't happen while you're losing weight. Meaning, when we had the guy who went on the Twinkie diet, the professor who did the Twinkie diet, he lived on Twinkies and drank a protein shake and took a multivitamin every day and lost weight because he tracked his calories meticulously. That is total garbage food. I think we can argue pretty reasonably that that's a worse diet than a ketogenic diet. 30 days into the diet, what did his blood work look like? It improved. Fasting glucose improved. His lipid profiles improved. Why? Because he lost like 20 pounds of body fat and was still in a caloric deficit. And by being in that caloric deficit, our concerns about things like elevated fructose in your diet, which raises triglycerides, they don't elevate as much because your body tends to burn through those extra triglycerides as fuel because you're in a caloric deficit. Your body's burning everything it can. The same thing when we're dealing with the elevated LDL. While you're in a caloric deficit, the elevated LDL cholesterol from the really high amount of saturated fat on a ketogenic diet doesn't manifest itself. That's why when we talk about the LDL, some people who are on keto are like, well, I got mine checked and it wasn't elevated. How much weight did you lose this month? That's why you don't do a ketogenic diet as a lifestyle. Because we know, based upon the long-term data now, that the leading experts in the world agree that there is causation between hardening of your arteries, not heart attack, but hardening of your arteries and elevated LDL cholesterol, that it is the actual direct cause. It's not a cofactor. It's not just one factor involved. It is the primary cause of hardening of your arteries, but it takes a long time. Like, you literally have to have elevated LDL cholesterol for probably about 10 years before you start to experience the effects. The problem is that it's cumulative. So if you go and do the ketogenic diet and maintain weight every single year for half the year, it could accumulate. Or even worse, when you get people who say, okay, I'm going to do this ketogenic lifestyle. Instead of doing this as an emergency type diet that they know they need to lose 30 or 50 pounds because they're going to die of a heart attack in 3 years if they don't, they go on what they call a ketogenic lifestyle. And then instead of continually losing weight, when we get to the point where you're eating too much saturated fat or too much refined sugar or too much vegetable oil, all this junk you don't want in your diet in excess, when you stop losing weight and you're now in energy maintenance or an energy surplus, meaning your calories are now constant and you stop losing weight, the scale stops going down. In other words, you are no longer in a caloric deficit. If you haven't lost a full pound of body weight in the last month, you are not in a caloric deficit. Now those numbers start to elevate. Now things like LDL cholesterol go up from too much saturated fat. Now things like triglycerides go up from too much refined sugar and fructose, right? That's what happens once you're at energy maintenance or energy surplus. And when people do that and they say, oh, well, I'm going to live this lifestyle. Oh, I need to figure out how to make keto brownies because, you know, they need to be eating brownies when they're trying to lose weight and they're not an extreme athlete. And there are people who suffer from appetite problems. Those people, and I have family members like that, who I've warned about this, who are still overweight, and they do a keto lifestyle, and then they say, oh, I'm going to make keto brownies, and they're still eating their high saturated fat diet, and they're still 30 pounds overweight and have been for the past year. So now they're overweight, and they're eating a massive amount of saturated fat every day. Their LDL cholesterol goes up, and they're still overweight because they're trying to work in treats. They're like, oh man, I was losing great weight really good when I ate nothing but steak, eggs, water, and some green vegetables, right? A handful of spinach every day, steak, eggs, water. Steak, eggs, water, spinach. Steak, eggs, water, spinach. Man, I lost the first 30 pounds doing that. Then they decide they want to start working in other treats, start pouring heavy cream on everything, putting butter on everything, extra butter in their coffee. Coconut oil and everything, adding all this extra oil and fat, and then treats so that they eat more calories. Then they stop losing weight. Now you're no longer in a calorie deficit and you're eating a ton of saturated fat. Your LDL goes up and it will eventually kill you. Pretty straightforward. But when we're talking about a short-term intervention, even with an extreme diet like this, that if you were to run in the long term is extremely unhealthy, And even in the short term, you should be under the care of a medical doctor. That is a thing you need to remember. You do not run a ketogenic diet outside of the care of a medical professional. Every registered dietitian will tell you that same thing. So no, you don't go run it on your own, but if you work with them and you know it works for you for what you're doing, they feel it's going to work for you, by all means carry on. But you need to understand that's a short-term intervention, because any health concerns that you have from the ketogenic diet are outweighed by the fact that you're over 100 pounds overweight. All right, you're going to die in the short term from being 100 pounds overweight compared to the long-term risk of the ketogenic diet. It's the lesser of two evils here. It doesn't make it a great diet, but what else are you going to do? Follow a diet that's not working for you and stay 100 pounds overweight so that you can die 20 years younger? That's your other option. The lesser of two evils in that case. So in that case, obviously, it would make sense to do that. And I don't have a problem with people using it for that purpose in that sort of situation under the care of a medical professional. It's athletic people who are like, I'm going to go run this diet just to try to lose a little bit of fat, or I'm going to stay on it. I'm going to stay on it for a year straight when they're not obese. They're not morbidly obese. These are people who are going to have many, many days and weeks where they're not in a caloric deficit while running this. What's going to happen? It's going to harm their health. And they're going to lose muscle mass easier. Unless they do a cycling ketogenic diet, in which case then their LDL goes up. Not a good situation. So hopefully that clarifies that again, and people understand that there are situations where a diet like a ketogenic diet that I'm not a fan of, I am against. There are still situations where it might actually be appropriate and might actually be the lesser of two evils as far as your health and fitness are concerned. And I think that's a perfect example. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.